Every day, thousands of black men and women are funneled into a system deliberately engineered to extract wealth from black communities and treat black people like second-class citizens. From slavery to today, America has always been kneeling on the throats of our people. We like to think Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves in 1863 and that Martin Luther King Jr. ended racism in 1965. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Oh, so you want to know the truth? The truth is that little has changed since the days of slavery and Jim Crow. The same Southern aristocrats that bought and sold black lives like cattle are still around today. But instead of old top hats and suits, they wear spiffy suits and ties, claiming that they're working to create a safer nation. Whether it's a cotton plantation or an overcrowded prison, the results are all the same. Black lives get reduced to property, and black families are destroyed by a system designed to extract maximum profit from us. In today's video, we're showing you how America's prison industrial complex is slavery rebranded for modern times. You'll see how exactly the system makes millions off of black labor, how efforts to reform the system have been intentionally broken, and how the very foundations of this country have been built to keep slavery around. In fact, did you know there's a hidden clause in the Constitution that technically allows slavery to continue to this day? It's right there in the 13th Amendment, but most history books conveniently skip over it. The amendment, ratified in 1865, states that slavery and involuntary servitude are abolished, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Those 15 words weren't thrown in randomly. They were deliberately included to create a massive loophole. This exception clause was a calculated move by lawmakers who understood exactly what they were doing. As soon as the ink dried on the 13th Amendment, Southern states got to work creating what were called black codes. These were laws specifically designed to criminalize normal behaviors that were common among newly freed black people. Imagine being arrested for walking without a purpose or walking at night. Those were actual crimes that could get you locked up. Other offenses included hunting on Sundays or simply settling on public or private land. These laws were targeted specifically to ensure a steady supply of black prisoners. What's even more revealing is how quickly convict leasing programs popped up across the South. These programs allowed states to lease out prisoners to private companies. And guess where many of these prisoners ended up working? The exact same cotton fields and plantations they had just been freed from. Southern states, facing destroyed prisons from the Civil War and economic depression, found that leasing out black prisoners was an easy way to generate income without having to build new facilities. The numbers tell the shocking story. By the 1870s, an astounding 95% of people in criminal custody throughout Southern states were black. In some states, convict leasing contracts generated 10% of the entire state's revenue. These were thousands of black men, women, and even children that were funneled into this system that looked suspiciously like the slavery that had supposedly been abolished. The conditions under convict leasing were often worse than slavery had been. Under slavery, enslaved people represented a financial investment for owners who had economic incentives to keep them alive and working. But under convict leasing, private companies had no reason to care about prisoners' well-being. They could simply be replaced when they died or became too ill to work. And while white prisoners were kept behind prison walls, black prisoners were deliberately put to work in public view, a visible reminder of what happened to those who stepped out of line. By the way, if you're enjoying the content so far and support the message we're trying to spread, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Every extra one of y'all helps bring awareness to all these stories that need to be told. Fast forward to today, and not much has changed except the packaging. Federal prisoners earn between 12 and 40 cents per hour. In Texas, inmates receive zero compensation for their labor, despite the Texas correctional industries being valued at nearly $89 million in 2014. Major corporations continue to profit from this arrangement, with 7% of state prisoners and 18% of federal prisoners working for for-profit companies. So who's really benefiting from this system? It's not the taxpayers, and it's certainly not the communities most affected by mass incarceration. Private prison corporations make billions through government contracts that pay them per prisoner. They profit from the cheap labor of inmates who make everything from office furniture to military equipment. Even the basic necessities of prison life have been monetized. Phone calls that cost dollars per minute, overpriced commissary items, and paid video visits create a constant stream of revenue extracted primarily from poor communities of color. The modern prison industrial complex is a network of interconnected interests and institutions that depend on keeping cells filled to maintain profitability. For private prisons especially, empty beds mean lost profit. Hundreds of corporations have their fingers in this pie, making money from what is essentially forced labor under a different name. Those corporations need their cells filled somehow, and that's where America's policing system comes into play. What most history classes never mention is that the first organized police forces in America weren't created to protect communities or solve crimes. They were established specifically to monitor, control, and terrorize Black people. The origins of modern policing trace directly back to slave patrols established in the Carolinas in the early 1700s. Known as paddy rollers, these roaming groups of armed white men were formal, government-sanctioned units designed with a very specific purpose: keeping Black people in their place. In fact, by 1721, South Carolina law required all white men to serve in slave patrols for a small period of time. These slave patrols had three primary functions that should sound disturbingly familiar today. First, they were tasked with capturing anyone who escaped enslavement. Second, they used terror tactics to prevent potential rebellions. And third, they administered brutal punishments to any enslaved person found outside plantation boundaries without proper permission. These patrols operated with nearly unlimited authority. They could search any plantation, whip any Black person they deemed suspicious, and kill anyone who resisted. What's truly crazy is what happened after the Civil War ended. When slavery was technically abolished, these slave patrols didn't disappear, they just transformed. In the South, this was especially true. Many of the same individuals who had hunted enslaved people simply put on new uniforms and continued their work under a different title. The tactics, attitudes, and priorities remained largely unchanged. The focus wasn't on protecting all citizens equally or solving crimes. It was specifically about monitoring and controlling newly freed Black Americans. This historical foundation continues to shape modern policing in ways that are impossible to ignore once you see the pattern. Today, the data speaks volumes about this continued legacy of racial control. Black Americans are 5 times more likely to be stopped by police without just cause compared to white Americans. When we dig deeper, the pattern becomes even clearer. Black men are twice as likely to be stopped without cause as Black women, and Black communities know it, with 65% of Black adults reporting they feel specifically targeted because of their race. And that's not to mention the militarization of modern-day police forces, particularly in predominantly Black neighborhoods. Police departments now receive military-grade equipment and training that focuses on combat rather than community protection. When heavily armed officers patrol Black neighborhoods with tactical gear better suited for war zones, it creates an atmosphere of occupation rather than protection. One of the most damning pieces of evidence about the true purpose of modern policing comes directly from the government's stance on the war against narcotics. John Ehrlichman, domestic policy advisor to President Nixon, later admitted the shocking truth behind this campaign that has devastated Black communities for generations. In his own words, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Blacks, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with and then criminalizing them both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night in the evening news." Did we know we were lying about the whole thing? Of course we did. Wow. The war on drugs was deliberately designed to criminalize Black Americans, disrupt their communities, and remove their leaders from society. And it worked exactly as planned, filling prisons with a disproportionate number of Black Americans for nonviolent offenses while leaving the power structure intact. So what's the connection between these historical patterns and today's policing practices. From slave patrols to modern police departments, the fundamental purpose hasn't changed: controlling blacks and maintaining racial hierarchy. The methods have evolved and become more sophisticated, but the targets and outcomes remain consistent. Today's practices of racial profiling, excessive force, and over-policing in black communities aren't bugs in the system. They're features working exactly as designed. When caught in the jaws of America's criminal justice system, Black Americans face an orchestrated machine designed to ensure conviction. Research reveals something disturbing. A white man with a felony conviction has better job prospects than a black man with a completely clean record. The justice system creates a mountain of barriers specifically targeting Black Americans. Cash bail functions as a powerful tool for discrimination, despite appearing race-neutral on paper. Before incarceration, Black men earn a median income of just $17,000 compared to $39,000 for white men. This economic gulf means a $5,000 bail might be insurmountable for many black defendants, leaving them locked up while awaiting trial. Pretrial detention creates devastating ripple effects. Defendants lose jobs, housing, and sometimes custody of children, all before conviction. Consider the case of Khalif Browder, who spent 3 years at Rikers Island awaiting trial for allegedly stealing a backpack, a charge eventually dismissed. Unable to post bail, he endured solitary confinement and abuse before his release. 2 years later, he ended up taking his own life. Under such immense pressure, many accept plea deals regardless of actual guilt, acquiring a permanent conviction record simply because they couldn't afford temporary freedom. For those reaching trial, black defendants face another obstacle through jury selection. Though the Supreme Court prohibited race-based juror exclusion in Batson v. Kentucky, prosecutors routinely eliminate black jurors using flimsy, race-neutral justifications. This practice ensures many black defendants face predominantly white juries, dramatically reducing their chances of fair treatment. This raises the question: who benefits from a system that keeps prisons packed with Black Americans? The prison industrial complex operates as a network of financial interests, from private prison corporations to prison service providers. Their business model depends on high incarceration rates, and they actively maintain those rates through political donations, lobbying for tough-on-crime legislation, and fighting reforms that would reduce prison populations. When prison doors swing open, they don't lead to freedom. For Black Americans caught in the criminal justice system, walking out of prison means entering an invisible cage designed with one purpose: to pull them right back in. In 11 states, more than 1 in 5 black citizens have permanently lost their right to vote, effectively silencing their political voice forever. These felony disenfranchisement laws aren't accidental side effects. They're the direct descendants of post-Civil War tactics used to suppress black political power after slavery was technically abolished. And for black prisoners, the prison sentence might end, but the punishment never does. Once you've been branded with a criminal record, you're systematically excluded from the very things needed to rebuild a life. Housing applications denied, food assistance rejected, student loans impossible to obtain. This web of restrictions creates a permanent underclass of citizens, people who've supposedly paid their debt to society, yet find themselves perpetually indebted through legal discrimination. This exclusion from political participation undermines the collective power of entire black communities. When significant portions of neighborhoods can't vote, those communities lose their ability to elect representatives who might advocate for their interests or challenge the very system that's oppressing them. It's a masterful strategy of political marginalization that echoes Jim Crow-era tactics, simply wrapped in the more palatable language of criminal justice. Studies confirm what many formerly incarcerated people already know. Having a criminal record cuts your chance of getting a job callback by half. For black men, who already face discrimination in hiring, this creates a nearly impenetrable barrier to economic stability. Imagine completing your sentence, determined to build a new life, only to face rejection after rejection from employers who won't even consider your application once they see the box that's been checked. Without stable income, people can't support their children, contribute to their communities, or build economic security. The cycle perpetuates itself as economic desperation pushes people toward survival crimes, sending them right back into the system that failed them in the first place. Meanwhile, those lucky enough to be released on parole or probation find themselves navigating a labyrinth of contradictory requirements seemingly designed for failure. You must maintain employment, but also make midday check-ins with your parole officer during work hours. You need stable housing, but housing discrimination makes finding a place to live nearly impossible. You're required to pay supervision fees and program expenses, but you can't find a job that pays enough to cover them. Miss a payment or an appointment, and you're violating the terms of your release, which means you could be headed right back to prison. These are intentional tripwires put in place to ensure people end up right back in prison. Even innocent mistakes like missing a meeting due to transportation issues or failing a test because of secondhand exposure can trigger reincarceration. The system creates a maze with no exit, explaining why approximately 76% of released prisoners are rearrested within 5 years. Each time someone cycles back through the system, they generate more revenue for private prison corporations, more jobs for prison staff, and more political capital for tough-on-crime politicians. What's particularly telling is how the system responds to proven alternatives. Things like restorative justice programs that focus on healing rather than punishment, bringing victims, offenders, and communities together to repair harm. Community supervision programs connect formerly incarcerated people with housing assistance, job training, and mental health services, addressing the root causes that lead to reoffending. These approaches consistently demonstrate higher success rates at a fraction of the cost of incarceration. Yet these alternatives remain chronically underfunded and underutilized. In 2012 alone, the United States spent nearly $81 billion on corrections, triple the rate of spending growth on public education over the previous 3 decades. This economic reality reveals the system's true priorities. When effective, cost-efficient alternatives to incarceration exist but aren't implemented, we have to question why. The answer becomes clear when we follow the money. The financial interests behind mass incarceration have a vested interest in keeping cells filled. Implementing programs that would reduce prison populations threatens their profits, regardless of whether those programs would better serve public safety or human dignity. As you've seen, our nation's history reveals an unbroken chain from plantation slavery to today's mass incarceration system. These aren't isolated chapters, but a continuing story of oppression that demands our attention and action. If this story resonates with you, then check out our video on neo-slavery, the bridge that connected plantation slavery to today's mass incarceration.